No one could handle the billionaire's daughter until a small-town waitress accomplished the impossible. What if the most difficult child in the world held the key to teaching a powerful mogul the single most important lesson of his life? In the corner booth of Maple Grove Diner, a small figure sat rigid, arms crossed tight over her chest, glaring with fierce, emerald eyes at anyone who dared to approach her kingdom of misery. 8-year-old Sophia Blake was a force of nature, or perhaps a natural disaster. That morning, she had already succeeded in reducing 3 separate waitresses to tears, flung a stack of buttermilk pancakes onto the sticky floor, and declared with definitive authority that the freshly squeezed orange juice was stupid. Her father, Harrison Blake, the legendary 42-year-old tech mogul, sat across from her. Exhaustion, heavy and profound, was etched deep into the contours of his face, a weariness far heavier than any jet lag. He had built a corporate empire worth billions, routinely commanded respect in gleaming boardrooms across every populated continent. Yet he felt utterly helpless, unable to decipher the simple code necessary to connect with his own daughter. Ever since the painful divorce 6 months prior, Sophia had transformed, becoming increasingly volatile and angry, violently pushing away every expensive professional who tried to help. Harrison had tried every imaginable fix. A rotation of prohibitively expensive therapists, exclusive European boarding schools, and an endless parade of meticulously vetted nannies, all of whom typically quit within weeks, citing emotional trauma. Nothing had worked to breach the defenses of her wounded heart. But today, in this unassuming, small-town diner, far removed from the sterile grandeur of his city life, something entirely different, something miraculous, was about to happen that would change the trajectory of their world forever. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know. Harrison Blake wasn't designed for a place like Maple Grove Diner. His typical breakfast engagements were orchestrated in the hushed, cavernous spaces of 5-star hotel suites, where servers moved like ghosts, using crystal glasses, and instinctively knew better than to speak unless specifically addressed. Yet, here he was, having endured a grueling 3-hour drive from the city following Sophia's latest, most dramatic meltdown at the exclusive private school he had just enrolled her in. The principal, her voice tight with frayed frustration and apology, had called that morning, explaining that Sophia had methodically barricaded herself inside the art room using chairs and easels and flatly refused to come out until her father, and only her father, arrived. The diner buzzed not with the muted clinking of silver, but with the warm, comfortable chatter of genuine locals. Weather-beaten farmers discussing crucial rain patterns, elderly couples quietly sharing the day's newspaper over bottomless coffee, and young mothers attempting to corral energetic toddlers into relative stillness. It was the kind of community place Harrison had completely forgotten existed, a world where people still knew each other's names and most sensitive stories. He checked his phone constantly, reflexively fielding urgent calls from his assistant regarding a multi-billion-dollar merger that, momentarily, seemed annoyingly trivial. Board meetings that once defined his existence now seemed like distant, abstract worries. Even the stock prices that fluctuated wildly seemed merely to mirror the chaotic volatility of his own patience. Sophia, meanwhile, had perfected the sophisticated art of making grown-ups universally uncomfortable. She had already loudly informed the kind elderly man at the adjacent table that his cologne smelled precisely like dead flowers. She told a young mother her baby was too loud, and, in a feat of sustained focus, had managed to stack all the sugar packets from their table and several nearby ones into an elaborate, formidable fortress around her untouched plate of cold toast. Her dark curls were pulled into a haphazard, messy ponytail. Her expensive school uniform was visibly wrinkled from the morning's dramatic, hurried exit, and her deep green eyes held a core of visible, aching hurt so profound it made Harrison's chest ache just to look at her. "Sophia, sweetheart, please just try to eat something small," Harrison murmured quietly, attempting to keep his voice level while glancing around nervously at the other diners who were starting to openly stare at the tense spectacle. "I don't want to," she replied, her voice carrying that specific, piercing tone that had become all too familiar in the last half-year. Defiant, searingly angry, but underneath it all, desperately, hopelessly sad. "I want to go home, real home with Mom." The words struck Harrison like a physical, agonizing blow. There was no real home anymore. The sprawling, custom-built mansion felt vast and oppressively empty without the clear, resonant sound of his ex-wife Rebecca's laughter echoing through the marble halls. The household staff tiptoed silently, perpetually walking on eggshells, terrified to engage with Sophia after too many disastrous incidents. Even the pampered family dog seemed visibly depressed, spending most of its days hiding silently under the heavy, antique furniture. Just as Harrison struggled to find any words, any combination of sounds, that might possibly breach the wall his daughter had built, a new waitress approached their booth. She moved with a quiet, efficient confidence, her navy uniform neat but clearly well worn, her smile authentic and genuine despite the obvious chaos surrounding their table. The waitress couldn't have been much older than 35. She possessed unusually kind eyes and hands that were slightly calloused, speaking volumes about sustained hard work and determination. Her name tag read, clearly and simply, Beth. Crucially, unlike the previous servers who had approached their table with palpable nervousness and apprehension, Beth seemed completely unfazed by Sophia's intricate fortress of sugar packets and the sticky pool of maple syrup she had deliberately spilled across the table. "Well now," Beth said, surveying the architectural scene with what appeared to be genuine, focused interest rather than any hint of judgment or annoyance. "It looks like someone is constructing something pretty impressive here. Mind if I take a look, Commander?" Sophia's eyes narrowed, shifting from anger to deep suspicion. "It's not for grown-ups," she stated firmly. "Good thing I'm not really a grown-up then," Beth replied seriously, the corners of her eyes crinkling as she deliberately crouched down low to Sophia's eye level. "I'm actually a professional fort inspector. This clearly is advanced architecture. What kind of defenses does it possess?" For the first time in months, Harrison saw a flicker of something new flash across his daughter's face that wasn't hardened anger or profound sadness. It was pure curiosity, maybe even the faint, long-forgotten ghost of a smile. "It's got sugar walls and syrup moats," Sophia said slowly, testing the waters, trying to discern if this new adult could possibly be trusted with such crucial, military-grade information. Beth nodded gravely, absorbing the details. "Excellent design choices. Very sticky. Very effective. I bet a pack of fire-breathing dragons couldn't manage to get past those defenses." Harrison watched, stunned, as his daughter actually giggled. A rare, bright sound he had almost entirely forgotten the frequency of. But his immediate wave of relief was tragically short-lived. His phone suddenly blared, the harsh, insistent sound shattering the fragile moment like brittle glass. The caller ID displayed the name of his head of operations, and Harrison knew instantly that it meant the critical Singapore deal was currently imploding. I have to take this," he muttered urgently, already stepping away from the table. His attention irrevocably split between the child and the crumbling empire. The instant he moved away, Sophia's fragile walls snapped back up. She swept the entire structure of sugar packets onto the floor with one violent, decisive motion, her face closing off into a mask of pure resentment. "See," she whispered, the bitterness thick. "He always leaves. Everyone always leaves." Beth didn't flinch at the sight of the scattered packets or the raw pain in Sophia's voice. Instead, she stood, then calmly sat down in Harrison's recently vacated chair, her movements slow, steady, and deliberate. "You know what I think?" she asked gently. "I think your dad's scared." "Scared?" Sophia scoffed, utterly incredulous. "He's not scared of anything. He's rich and he's super important. Being rich and important doesn't protect you from being scared," Beth said quietly, her voice warm and low. "Sometimes, having all that money and importance just makes the truly scary stuff even scarier to lose. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." Harrison returned a minute later to find his daughter listening intently to something Beth was saying about butterfly wings, how they are often stronger and more resilient when they aren't trying so desperately hard to be perfectly pristine. But before he could even ask what key insight he had missed, his phone rang again. This second phone call shattered whatever tiny, fragile piece of trust had been building between him and Sophia. Harrison's face went shockingly pale as he listened to his lawyer's grim explanation. Rebecca's attorneys were aggressively filing for full custody. They were using his documented inability to provide a stable, consistent environment as the primary grounds, citing Sophia's increasingly difficult behavioral problems at 3 different high-end schools in the last 6 months alone. "I'm sorry, Beth. I have to go immediately," Harrison said, his voice tightening with overwhelming panic. "There's been a critical development with my daughter's custody case." But as he reached instinctively for Sophia's small hand, she pulled it away sharply, violently. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you." The entire diner fell into an immediate, heavy silence. Sophia's voice cracked, thick with the weight of 8 years of accumulated hurt and neglect. Suddenly, she wasn't just an angry, spoiled child throwing a petulant tantrum. She was a vulnerable little girl whose entire world had been violently torn apart, who had lost everything that felt stable and safe, and who was now watching her father choose phone calls and pressing business deals over simply finishing breakfast with her. Yet again. "Sweetheart, please," Harrison pleaded, desperation creeping, cold and ugly, into his voice. "We need to leave to go handle this legal thing immediately, so we can make sure we stay together." "Together?" Sophia's laugh was brittle and far too bitter, far too mature for her age. "You're never together with me, Daddy. You're always somewhere else, even when you're sitting right here at the table." Beth stood slowly, and Harrison fully expected her to step back, to wisely allow this raw family drama to play out without any further involvement. Instead, she knelt smoothly beside Sophia's chair. "You know what else I learned about butterfly wings?" she said softly, speaking only to Sophia, as if the entire diner full of curious eyes wasn't watching their every move. "Sometimes they get ripped or torn, and when they do, the butterfly has to decide whether to keep flying anyway, or just stop forever. But here is the greatest secret. The torn, broken places can often heal stronger than they were before the break." Sophia's angry, protective facade finally cracked. "What if they're too torn? What if they can't fly anymore?" "Then they wait," Beth said simply, her expression serene. "They rest somewhere safe and quiet until they remember that flying is what they were ultimately made for." Harrison felt something vital break open and shift inside his own chest as he watched his daughter's lip begin to tremble. For months, he had been frantically trying to fix everything. The custody battle, the school problems, Sophia's intense anger. Using only his lawyers, his money, and sheer force of will. But this simple waitress in a worn small-town diner was offering something profound that he had completely forgotten how to give: patience, unwavering presence, and the simple, monumental act of staying put. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. His phone began to ring again, its vibration a muffled demand in his pocket. But this time, Harrison looked down at the screen, saw the name of his board chairman, and made a choice that surprised everyone, most of all himself. He reached down, pressed a single button, and turned the device completely off. "The Singapore deal can wait indefinitely," Harrison said quietly, his voice stronger, calmer, and more focused than it had been all morning. "My daughter absolutely cannot." Sophia stared at him in utter shock. In her 8 years of life, she had never once witnessed her powerful father turn off his phone during business hours. She had grown up internalizing the belief that conference calls, mergers, and emergency board meetings were inherently more critical than bedtime stories or tending to scraped knees. Beth smiled faintly and moved to quietly clear the scattered sugar packets from the floor. But Sophia suddenly reached out, her small hand pressing against Beth's arm to stop her. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes wide with a fragile hope. Can we build it again together this time?" What happened next felt precisely like watching solid ice thaw rapidly under the warmth of spring sunlight. Harrison slid awkwardly out of his side of the booth and squeezed in tightly next to Sophia, his bespoke, expensive suit looking utterly ridiculous against the worn vinyl seat. He picked up a single sugar packet with hands far more accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar contracts and carefully placed it exactly where his daughter directed. "The walls need to be exactly 3 packets high," Sophia explained seriously, leaning close. "Otherwise, The dragons will easily see over them and find the treasure. Dragons? Harrison repeated thoughtfully, as if he were memorizing a foundational business principle. Of course. What else should I know about dragon defense strategy? For the first time in 6 months, father and daughter were working on something together. Not forced homework monitored by tutors, not structured, therapeutic activities planned by nannies, but the simple, gloriously silly task of constructing a sugar packet fort in a small-town diner. Beth brought them fresh packets without being asked, returning moments later, and even contributed essential architectural advice about optimal moat placement and the engineering requirements for a fully functioning drawbridge. The other diners gradually returned to their own conversations, but many continued to watch with soft, private smiles as the famous billionaire learned the intricate details of defending a castle from various types of fire-breathing mythical creatures, all taught by his 8-year-old daughter. Harrison found himself truly listening, not just patiently waiting for his turn to speak or distractedly checking his phone, but actually hearing Sophia's elaborate mythology about the different dragon types and their specific, exploitable weaknesses. "The purple dragons are the trickiest," Sophia said, placing the final packet with ceremonial importance. "They pretend to be nice, they smile a lot, but they're really just waiting for the perfect chance to take your treasure." Harrison's throat tightened painfully as he immediately understood the deeper, raw meaning of what she was really saying. Purple dragons were like all the opportunistic people in their world who smiled falsely at Sophia only because of who her father was, who always wanted something from the family fortune, and who inevitably disappeared the moment things got genuinely difficult or uncomfortable. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. But then Sophia looked up at him with those intense green eyes, which now held just a delicate flicker of hope, and she asked, her voice small and clear, "Daddy, are you a purple dragon?" The question hung in the air like morning mist, delicate, pervasive, and profoundly challenging. Harrison felt the full, crushing weight of years of rushed goodnight kisses, missed school recitals, and endlessly postponed promises settle heavily on his shoulders. He could easily give Sophia the facile answer, the one that would temporarily smooth things over and let him off the hook. But something about the quiet courage she had just shown in asking the question made him realize he needed to be equally brave. "Sometimes I think I might have been," he said honestly, the admission a quiet tremor. "I got so worried and obsessed about protecting our treasure, the wealth, the company, that I forgot the single most important treasure was sitting right here with me all along." Sophia studied his face with the intense, relentless scrutiny only children possess, looking past the expensive suit and deep into his eyes, searching for the unvarnished truth beneath his words. Slowly, carefully, she reached into her small backpack and pulled out something that instantly caught Harrison's breath in his chest. It was a faded photograph of them together from last Christmas. Before the divorce papers, before the lawyers and the custody battles, before everything fell dramatically apart. In the picture, they were both laughing, a big, genuine, shared laugh at something Rebecca had said right before she snapped the shot. Sophia had been carrying it with her, protecting it all this time. "I kept this," she whispered, her voice thick, "because I wanted to remember when you used to smile at me like that." Harrison's meticulously constructed composure finally, completely crumbled. He pulled his daughter close, engulfing her in a tight hug, and for the first time in months, she did not pull away. She melted into him, exactly like she used to when she was smaller, when a hug from Daddy truly could fix any problem in the world. Beth quietly refilled Harrison's coffee mug and gently left a small piece of folded paper beside his cup. When he looked down at it, he found a simple, childlike drawing, a butterfly with slightly torn wings, still clearly soaring and flying. At the bottom, she had written in neat script, "Some things heal stronger after they break." Over the next focused hour, Harrison called his lawyer and quietly instructed him to scrap the current aggressive strategy and propose a drastically different custody arrangement, one entirely focused on what Sophia needed for stability, rather than what would guarantee a win in court. He called his assistant and, for the first time in a decade, cleared his schedule entirely for the remainder of the week. Most importantly, he called Rebecca and asked if the three of them could have a civil dinner together, not to viciously fight about custody or lay blame for their failures, but simply to figure out how to transition into being the kind of functional, peaceful divorced parents that Sophia deserved. When they finally rose to leave the diner, Sophia carefully carried their fragile sugar packet fort in a small, square-to-go container that Beth had thoughtfully provided. "For my room," she explained, holding it tight, "so I can always remember that we built something together." Harrison left a crisp $100 tip on the table and slipped his business card underneath the coffee cup with a quick note scribbled on the back. "Thank you for reminding me what truly matters. If you ever want to change careers, I know someone who could desperately use a consultant specializing in high-level dragon defense strategy." As they walked toward the car, Sophia reached out and slipped her small, warm hand into his. "Daddy," she said, "next weekend, can we come back here? Just us." Harrison squeezed her hand gently, a simple promise in the pressure. "Every weekend if you want, little dragon expert. We've got a lot of catching up to do." If you enjoyed the story, please remember to leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey of healing and hope.